President Obama concluding his big economic speech at Cuyahoga Community College. We have a few minutes left. Jonathan Alter, what are your thoughts?
I thought this, honestly, was one of the least successful speeches I've seen Barack Obama give in several years. It was long-winded. He had a good argument to make, and at the beginning of the speech, he seemed to be making it in a fairly compelling way, but then he lost the thread, and the speech was way too long, and I think he lost his audience by the end. 54-minute
speech, but for the first time, we heard the president position Mitt Romney and his allies, Mr. Romney as he referred to him, and his allies in Congress, clumping those two together.
Look, I think the president was very effective in describing a position that his opponents hold that he and many of the Democrats believe will manifestly not work. That was a very effective part of the speech. When he went sort of away from offense onto defense, which is what we've done and what we're going to do, it became unbelievably diffuse. And in some sense, purely as a political phenomenon, it was very ineffective in that respect because it very well characterized the opponents as this is not going to work, but it didn't really give you the sense of what will.
But what he also did in categorizing what would not work was the example, Jonathan, of this is the same theory, according to the president, that existed, that resulted in the disaster that we saw with this economy. And his point was that's exactly what the person who wants to take my job now will do. That's what you can bet on.
And that's a powerful argument. It didn't work in 2010. It can work properly framed in 2012 for the president, but he needs to take that section of the speech. The best part of the speech was when he was raising the question of how you create jobs, how you move the country forward. He has to turn this tamarind into the how election, but he didn't quite nail that point. In other words, this has to be an election about how we move forward, and when that comparison is made, he'll stack up pretty well.
Though, Jonathan, he said how we move forward, at least in his estimation, is by not going back to the same policies of the previous administration. And he laid the burden on the voter by saying, if you want this deal, you can have the deal with Mr. Romney and his allies.
And that part was fairly convincing. But what didn't work was when he said, you, the voter, can break the stalemate. Everybody knows that if Obama wins and there's still a Republican Congress, we'll have more stalemate. But this competing vision idea, that these are two starkly different ideas about how we create jobs and how we move forward as a country. This is the how election. And if anything comes out of this, it should be that. I don't think he quite nailed that point.
But he issued up the challenge to the press and others in asking Mitt Romney, Governor Romney, how he would do it, how he would reduce the deficit, how he would pay for tax cuts that are all but sure.
That was the really effective part and the really accurate part, which is to say, look, if you are worried about the deficit and you are worried about spending and you are worried about the future of our country, what Mitt Romney is proposing, what Eric Cantor is proposing, what the Republicans are proposing will actually make that concern much worse. And I have an idea here that he is saying, as the Democrats, to address that issue that we all agree on. That's a much more effective tack than what's been taken to date. But as Jonathan said, and I think as we all recognize, it simply has to come together in a much more tight, much more forceful fashion.
All right. Thank you both.